This is a very, very activist court, the most activist court in my lifetime. They rewrote the law to say that, so they said that women could be paid less than men. They rewrote the law to say that age discrimination laws won't apply if corporate interests don't want them to. They rewrote the law to give ExxonMobil a $2 billion windfall, and they rewrote the law to say that corporations could come in and meddle in elections in this country.
Senator Leahy points out that regardless of whom President Barack Obama selects to replace Justice Stevens, regular people in the U.S. are faced with a series of Supreme Court decisions which defer to the interests of corporations. We spoke last week to attorney and activist John Bonifaz about the movement to prevent a Supreme Court ruling from derailing our democracy. It's been a few weeks since we checked in on the ramifications of the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United. You remember that's the case that pretty much lifted the limits on corporate and union spending come election time. Well, on the week of the decision, we heard about a new organization, Free Speech for People, that was just starting up to fight. With us is the director of Free Speech for People, John Bonifaz. Hey, John, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Just to recap, it's been now a couple of months that Citizens United, that decision is kind of the law of the land. First off, what are you seeing in terms of on-the-ground actual impacts of that, to some maybe obscure legal case on electioneering?
Well, we're already seeing corporations beginning to use their general treasury funds in political elections, advertisements purchased in the state of Texas and other places, where they're going to use their muscle in ways that will drown out ordinary citizen voices. Of course, this decision is antithetical to what the framers intended with the First Amendment and the first 200 years of our nation's history, where corporations were never treated as people with free speech rights. Now corporations are able to spend their billions of dollars of their general treasury funds to really undermine our elections and threaten our democracy.
The right will say, well, but unions were given that same right.
Unions and corporations are not people. People are people. They have free speech rights. And for the past 30 years, what we've seen is an erosion of the First Amendment, with corporations misusing the First Amendment to strike down democratically enacted reforms. It should be noted, however, that unions represent working people. They do not have ability to aggregate wealth, to have limited liability, perpetual life. Those are qualities that corporations have, which clearly are not qualities that you and I have as people.
I think the last data I saw was union spending was something like 18% of what corporations spend.
Absolutely, and they're going to be far, far more outspent now with this ruling.
So coming back to what can be done, for many it seemed just overwhelming. Local states, even cities have been fighting for cleaner elections, for elections with less corporate money, more public sponsorship of elections in Portland, in Maine. We hear about it regularly. Did Citizens United have an effect on those efforts this quickly?
Well, I think the ruling ultimately endangers those efforts if we do not proceed along a parallel track to amend the Constitution to make clear that corporations do not have free speech rights and their ability to drown out ordinary citizen voices with their general treasury funds. Public funding of elections is a critical reform, and it needs to move forward at the federal level as well as at the state level. But we also need to recognize we need to reclaim our First Amendment now and ensure that corporations stop misusing the First Amendment for their own agenda.
Well, so how do we do that? I mean, we're up against the billions of dollars of the corporations you just mentioned.
Well, we've amended our Constitution 27 times before in our nation's history, sometimes in response to egregious Supreme Court rulings. This is one of those historic moments where we as a people have to stand up together, and we invite people to join us at freespeechforpeople.org to do that, to stand up and say we need to amend it the 28th time to make clear that we as a people govern, not we the corporations.
I heard Ralph Nader, and you're a Nader person from a long way back. Ralph Nader recently wrote about how he feels, in fact, it's going to be elites, including in corporate elites, we're going to have to take the lead on these kinds of changes because people simply don't have the power under our current political system to change the political system to limit elite power.
I would say it's going to take all of us. I agree that we need to have people at corporate levels who recognize how dangerous this is to our democracy to be participating, but we also need to ensure that people at all walks of life organize together in a way that demands that we, the people, govern, and we are going to reclaim our democracy.
So talk about what's happening at the local level and how people can plug in.
Well, people at the local level in various parts of the country have joined us in this campaign at freespeechforpeople.org. They've signed our resolution. There's a video on our site about a young mother, Jessica Sharp, who organized a rally on her own. She'd never previously been engaged in political action, and she brought together people from all walks of life outside the state capitol in Maryland in late February to say we need to reclaim our Constitution and our democracy. We're calling on people around the country to do what they can in their time to join this campaign, to stand up and be counted. Now, there are other efforts that are important alongside this amendment effort, and we're working with people who want to have resolutions at the local level to be passed to help call on Congress to pass an amendment, but also people who want to change corporate charter laws to ensure that when it comes to corporations in their states, they should not be permitted to engage in making political expenditures. I
might just have to say, you seem terribly reasonable and cool, calm, and collected. I would like to see a few more people with their hair on fire about this. I mean, there is not a subject that people do not come in to this studio and talk about where the final answer isn't, well, in order to make the change, we have to get corporate influence out of our elections. We have to have public financing of elections. It comes back to that, whether it's healthcare or environment or worker safety, union power, you name it, every single issue. This question comes up, and we've just seen one of the biggest setbacks, it seems to me, in our lifetimes. I want to believe that we can do it, the organizing that you're describing, but I don't feel the heat around it. I feel kind of despair.
Well, I think the heat's building, and I'm outraged. I'm very outraged by what has happened here, but I think of the life of Doris Haddock, Granny D, who just recently passed away at the age of 100. You know, she walked across the country at the age of 89, walking through 3,200 miles, 14 months later, reaching Washington, D.C. to overhaul our campaign finance system. And when I heard that she had passed away, I thought about the fact that when she was born, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution had not yet even been enacted, guaranteeing women the right to vote. In her lifetime alone, she saw 9 amendments passed by the United States Congress and ratified by 3/4 of the states. We can do this. We've done it before. We can do it again for our Constitution and for our democracy.
Examples in your mind of the impact that this decision has already had, that's already being felt?
I think already we're seeing a psychological impact at the federal and state level where people in elected office know that if they go after corporate interests on behalf of the public interest, they could be targeted. We've heard this from elected officials in Congress and at the state level. And that psychological impact is as detrimental to our democracy as the actual impact that corporations will have when they start spending this money.
All right, John Bonifaz. You can find out more information at our website. That's GRITtv.org. We'll continue to stay on this story for sure.
Mr. Speaker, Justice Brandeis got it right. Democracy or wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but not both. And that's truer today as the United States Supreme Court just wiped away decades of legal precedent allowing corporations to spend unlimited money from their treasuries on our elections. Today, I introduced an amendment to the Constitution of the United States along with Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, John Conyers. This is really important. I mean, it's an important moment to capture. You don't amend the Constitution often. But the Supreme Court really has left us with no choice but to change the Constitution and make sure that people own our government and our elections and not the corporations. The American people already believe that corporate special interests and their lobbyists run the show around here. I mean, the halls are crawling with them. But that's not enough. Now the court says to the big banks, to the drug companies, to the insurance companies, hey, all bets are off and it's open season. Our elections are for sale. Here, the court has really left us no choice. They became activists in a way that we haven't seen a court in a long time, and they wiped away decades of precedent. I think that people will quickly realize that we would much rather have our elections run by people and paid for by the American people and not by corporate special interests.